This is the new Toyota Innova HyCross, and Toyota has intentionally styled it more like an SUV. It's got a higher bonnet line. The headlamps look so similar to the Fortuners. It's got cladding on its bumpers. It's got a better stance. It's got a revised C-pillar. All of this is very SUV-like. But can it really replace an SUV? To find out, we're putting it against Toyota's king in the SUV segment, the Fortuner. We're going to be comparing them on every important metric. We're going to be talking about styling, interiors, space on the inside, features, ride quality, handling, performance, everything that you would want to know about these two cars. Before we go ahead, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the Evo India channel so you don't miss another video drop, and let me know in the comments, what are you? Are you an SUV guy or an MPV guy? Now, when it comes to styling in the SUV segment, it's all about presence, road presence. And the Innova HyCross, it has really stepped it up compared to the Innova Krista. The bonnet line, it's a lot higher, it's a lot flatter. The face, a lot more aggressive. You've got these headlights that actually resemble the Fortuner's headlights a fair bit. And a grille that reminds me of the Hilux's grille to some degree. So the face is a lot more aggressive. But when it comes to sheer, outright road presence, there's nothing like the Toyota Fortuner. Just look at the size of this thing. The bonnet line, it's almost at my chest. That's much higher than what the Innova HyCross has. The bumpers, they sit so much higher off the road compared to the HyCross. The face is a lot more aggressive. It looks really, really cool, really angry and aggressive. That SUV-like styling, nothing beats the Fortuner there. Now, it's worth talking about the wheels as well. This HyCross, it gets 16-inch wheels. Not as large as the Fortuner's 18-inch wheels, but it's worth mentioning that the HyCross, it does get 17s on its hybrid variant. This is the petrol variant. There is one place that the HyCross does beat the Fortuner though, the wheelbase. It is longer than the Fortuner's wheelbase. The Fortuner may be longer, wider, taller overall, but where the wheelbase is concerned, the HyCross is the champion. Now from the rear, again the HyCross does look more SUV-like. You've got this cladding at the bottom, you've got these straightened out lines, no more soft lines, and it looks really aggressive. But then again, you compare it to that, you compare it to the Fortuner, and that looks really aggressive. Again, the bumper sits so much higher off the road. The styling elements, they look a lot cooler. You've got that massive spoiler at the rear. There's nothing that beats the Fortuner when it comes to sheer outright presence. Now, the first thing that stands out when you're sitting in the driver's seat of the Fortuner is the driving position. You've got this really tall, really commanding driving position that makes you feel like king of the road. The seats, they are electrically adjustable, so you can raise the height up if you want a higher vantage point, or you can get them down. And the steering wheel, it's adjustable for rake as well as reach. So you can actually get yourself into a nice, comfortable, very commanding driving position in the driver's seat. Another thing that stands out on the Fortuner's cabin is the sheer quality of the interior. Everything feels really nicely done here. So you've got these leather seats, you've got leather on the dashboard, you've got soft touch plastics, you've got this really high quality plastic, 4 wood inserts. It all feels very well put together. And even the buttons, you see the buttons on the steering wheel, you see the buttons on the aircon controls, even the stuff up here, it all feels very high quality. It feels built to last. It feels rugged. Now on the features front, the Fortuner can't really match the top end variants of the Innova HyCross. You now do get ventilated seats on the Fortuner. This particular car doesn't have it, but you do get it on newer Fortuners. But that aside, the Innova HyCross actually commands a lot more in terms of features. So you've got that nicer big screen in the Innova HyCross. You've got a panoramic sunroof, a tire pressure monitoring system, wireless CarPlay and Android Auto. A lot of stuff that the Fortuner does not get. But it's worth mentioning that the Fortuner does get 7 airbags compared to the Innova's 6 airbags. Other standout bits about the Fortuner that the Innova HyCross doesn't have, these chunky grab rails, typical of off-roaders. You've got the 4x4 dial over here, so you've got this knob that you can switch into 4 high, 4 low. Obviously the Innova being front wheel drive, that is not something you get. And the power and eco mode buttons, all of these buttons, again, very chunky, but very well put together. Overall, sitting in the Fortuner's cabin, it feels really robust, really commanding, really solid. However, at a car that costs, what, 42 lakhs ex-showroom, it does feel a little bit lacking on features. Just like the front, you've got to climb into the back seat, and even in the back seat, you've got a really commanding view over everything else on the road. Now, what is the back seat itself like? You've got a reasonable amount of knee room. The wheelbase is shorter than the Innova Krista, but I'm not tight on knee room over here. I have this on rails, so I can move this forward if I want to make more space for people in the back, but if I move it all the way forward, then knee room does feel a little compromised. So move it all the way back. You also get a recline for the bench at the back, but you cannot get captain seats on the Fortuner, so you do only get the bench. In terms of criticism, I don't like the floor. It's quite high. You do not have enough thigh support because of that, and you've also got a transmission tunnel over here. No, it's not too high, but it is there. Otherwise, the back seat, it's pretty stark. There's not much by way of creature comforts over here. There's no window blinds, there's nothing. You've got a separate AC section, so you can control your AC from here. For auto, you can control the fan speed, and you've got your vents up here in the roof, and you've got an armrest with cup holders. But that aside, not much going on in the backseat of the Fortuner. You've got a commanding view, but it's not as comfortable as the Innova Krista. Now let's jump into the third row of the Fortuner and see what that's like. So getting the seat down, actually very easy. It's got a one-touch tumble. So with 2 fingers, I can lift the middle row out of the way, jump in, and slide in into the third row. Now, the second row is in its middle setting. This is not all the way back, but it's not all the way in front either. And in terms of room, honestly, there's not too much. My knees are already touching the seat in front. They're pointing upwards. The floor is quite high. It's not a very comfortable seating position. There's not too much room for my feet either. The mounts for this seat are getting in the way, so my feet are really close together. That aside, you've got AC vents up here, you've got small cubby holes for your phone and any other knickknacks that you want to put. But in terms of space, not too much. Comfort, not too great. This is not a back seat that I want to spend too much time in. On the interiors of the Toyota Innova HyCross, you've got a completely redesigned dashboard that looks far more modern and far more contemporary. Now, this particular variant we are testing is the petrol variant, so it doesn't have too much kit. It's got a downsized screen, it doesn't even have automatic AC. It's really basic in terms of spec, but it is the hybrid that will compete with the Toyota Fortuner, and that has a completely revised dashboard. So the screen, it gets wireless Android Auto and CarPlay. You've got a 9-speaker JBL audio system. You've got proper amount of kit in the Toyota Innova HyCross. Ventilated seats, all of that stuff makes a huge difference to how upmarket the Innova HyCross now feels. That aside, in terms of the cabin itself, some of the plastics, they're not up to the mark in terms of what we've come to expect from Toyota. They feel a little down market. In this one, you've got really hard touch plastics everywhere, so it doesn't feel expensive at all. The hybrids, they do have a soft touch dashboard, but even that is not up to the mark in terms of what we've come to expect from Toyota. But in terms of storage spaces, things are really well planned in here. You've got a large, deep cubbyhole in here. You've got 2 big cup holders, good storage space in the doors. You've got storage in the dash over here. You've got your glove box. So storage in the Innova HyCross is not an issue. Now, in terms of the driving position itself, it is tall, it is commanding, but not as much as the Toyota Fortuner. When you sit in a Fortuner and then you sit in this feels a little more sunken in. This feels a little more car-like. Even the controls, the weight of the controls make it feel more car-like. Your steering, it is adjustable for rake and reach. Your seat, it is adjustable. You've got height adjustability here, manual in this car, but it is electrical in the hybrid. If you're going to be spending a lot of time in the second row of the Innova, I would highly recommend the captain seats. They are much more comfortable than this, and you will have a much better time in the second row. That said, this is the 8-seater, and to be honest, this is still very, very comfortable. You've got tons of room, you've got tons of comfort. Compared to the Fortuner, just look at the amount of space I have. I can stretch out. I can literally cross my legs and stretch out as if I'm sitting in a business class seat almost. You know, it's got that much room. The knee room is, I don't know, is this more than a foot? It's probably more than a foot. It's ridiculous the amount of space the Innova has. A lot of that is thanks to the longer wheelbase that it gets, and it's just crazy the amount of space I get. Headroom as well. Generous headroom, generous knee room. This is a very spacious cabin. Like the Fortuner, I can move this in front, so I mean, it comes even more further ahead, but you can really find a comfortable position. You can find a comfortable compromise between this and the space and the back. Something worth noting, and I think one of the biggest differences from the Fortuner's backseat, is just the amount of thigh support I have. The fact that the floor is lower down, because this is a monocoque, means I have a lot better under thigh support. It's just a lot more comfortable. You've also got a flat floor over here, so there's no transmission tunnel, nothing interrupting the sort of space for your feet. It's really nice in here. Now, this being the lower spec variant, it misses out on a lot of creature comforts, but the hybrid gets tons of stuff. So you've got automatic climate control with a separate zone. Not in this car, but in that car. You get blinds, you get USB ports, you get USB ports here as well, but you just get a lot of space and features, and you do get an armrest over here with cup holders. The captain seats, you actually get a fold out tray table which you can use, which is really cool. But like I said, space over here is incredibly good. If you're going to be spending a lot of time in the back seat, I'm going to have to pick the Innova. But let's also hop into the third row and see what that is like. Getting into the third row of the Innova HyCross is not as easy as the Fortuners, because you don't have the one-touch tumble seat. So you pull on this lever, this tilts forward, but you've got to manually pull it forward. Once you've done that, you've got this large aperture to get into. So you climb in, then you've got a ton of space. Now, the first thing worth noting is that this seat is actually a 3-seater. You've got a third seat belt up in the roof over here, so you can fit 3 people in here and make the Innova an 8-seater. Now, in terms of space in the third row, this is actually very impressive. This middle row, it is set to a mid position. I've got about 3 or 4 inches of knee room free if I sit in the middle row right now. But over here, I've actually got space between my knees and the front seat. I can take this seat even more forward and free up even more room for me in the third row. Headroom as well, it's adequate. I've got about an inch of space, but it's enough. I'm sitting on this little hump over here. If I sit in a seat, it'll probably be a little better. My feet are lower down because the floor is lower, and that means I have better under thigh support. It's a lot more comfortable to be seated in. I can tuck my feet under the seats in front like this, and it's a lot more comfortable for a third row. This is not a third row which is there for the sake of it, for the spec sheet. This is a genuinely usable third row that 2, if not 3 adults can sit in for reasonably long hours. If third row comfort is your priority, this is the place to be. Now let's start with the Toyota Fortuner, because this is the archetype in the SUV segment. Everybody wants to be like the Fortuner. First up, performance. This has a 2.8 liter diesel engine. Big diesel, big torque. So in terms of performance, this thing is effortless. You've got so much performance on tap. You've got, of course, drive mode. You put it into power mode, and the sort of effortlessness it delivers in the performance is really impressive. It just picks up speed so effortlessly, so easily, and those typical diesel characteristics, right, of that long slug of torque, that near endlessness of the torque, that is something that's very prevalent with the Toyota Fortuner. That's something that's missing from the Innova HyCross. At least that's what I felt on the first drive. But with that diesel effortlessness comes the diesel clatteriness. So you've got a lot of diesel clatter in here, and it's stuff that permeates into the cabin as well. You can feel it, slight vibrations through the pedals, through the floor. You can also hear it. So when you're driving around in a Fortuner, there's always that drone in the background. It's always prevalent. But that's part of the Fortuner experience. It's part of the SUV experience. It doesn't feel like a CVT, and that's nice. It's familiar. It's something that you enjoy, and you've got paddle shifter. So if you want to take manual control, you can. Then, now something that's immediately apparent when you step inside the Fortuner is the ease of driving, or actually the lack of it. This has a heavy steering. The controls are heavy. Everything about it feels a little cumbersome. Again, that is traditional SUV stuff. It's stuff that people have grown to love, grown to endure about SUVs. Older SUVs, the Pajeros, all of that used to have these heavy steerings. And that's something that continues with the Fortuner. It's a stark difference to modern SUVs, say a Creta or a Seltos or Kushaq, those non-SUV SUVs, those crossover SUVs. They're very light to control. They've got electric power steering. This one has hydraulic power steering, and you can feel it. You can feel it in the weight of the steering, the weight of the pedals. It feels a little cumbersome to drive. So around town, it is a bit of an effort. However, out on the highway, those heavy controls actually add to the sense of stability at speed. Then there's the ladder frame chassis. It doesn't feel like a monocoque. It feels like a traditional ladder frame, which means ride quality, it isn't the finest out there. You do get a little bit of jiggle at speed. You can feel it bouncing over imperfect roads. When there are broken patches, you can feel it in the cabin. It's indestructible in that you can drive over those broken patches really hard, but you will feel it in the cabin. If you want to be comfortable inside the cabin, you will find yourself slowing down for really bad patches of road. Ride quality, it isn't a strength of the Fortuner. Then there's the handling as well. Now, ladder frame chassis aren't traditionally great handlers, and compared to a monocoque, this isn't the best handler, So you throw it around a bend, there's a lot of body roll, there's a lot of body movement. It doesn't feel tied down, so you don't feel so connected to the front end, and it's not a lot of fun. And you don't have to find a twisty road to realize what the handling characteristics of this car are like. Just try changing lanes at high speed and you will feel it. You won't feel the same sort of confidence that you feel from a monocoque frame. So in terms of outright dynamics, the Fortuner isn't the top of the class. But it is worth adding that no matter what you say about its ride and handling and all of that, it is indestructible. So you can drive it over the worst possible roads. You can hammer it over the worst possible roads and it'll just last. Nothing will rattle, nothing will fall off, nothing will break. It is indestructible. It is one of those cars that has built its reputation for reliability so comprehensively that people don't even question it. And that's something that you cannot take away from the Fortuner. So while ride quality might not be top of its list, it is indestructible and it will keep going and going and going no matter how bad the roads are. And then there's the one thing that the Fortuner has that the Innova simply cannot touch it on, and that's 4x4 ability. This has a proper transfer case. It's right now in two-wheel drive, but you can switch it to four-wheel drive, and it even has low ratio. So it has proper off-road capability. You look at the way the bumpers are. I pointed out the bumpers while I was talking about the styling, and yes, they look very cool, but they also have a function. You've got really good approach departure angles. The taller ride height means you've got better ramp over angles, and no one's going to be taking the Innova HyCross properly off-road. But this is a car that you can take properly off-road if you want to. It is a proper SUV in the traditional sense of the word. And speaking about ride, the second row as well, it isn't the most comfortable. So you don't have as much space, but it also jiggles around a little bit more. So it does feel a little compromised. But people swear by it. People love the Fortuner. But when it comes to how it feels to drive, there's nothing that can touch it. And there are people who enjoy the sensations of what the Fortuner delivers. Omkar, who's the owner of this Fortuner, looked at the Innova HyCross and just shrugged. He said, no, I don't want that. I like the takat that the Fortuner gives. The feeling of takat, the strength that it has, the robustness of what it delivers. Also the feeling of just being the king of the road. You feel like a proper king over here. Everything has heft to it. The controls, the doors, the buttons, everything about it has a sense of heft, and that's not something that can be replicated very easily. So yes, the Fortuner does have its flaws. It is imperfect, but to a certain specific hardcore set of buyers who want nothing but the macho-ness and the ruggedness of the Fortuner, there's nothing they'll never look at anything else. And to that audience, this is the SUV to have. Okay, now from the Fortuner to the Innova HyCross, the initial impressions are of it being a lot easier to drive. Everything feels a lot lighter. The steering, it's a lot easier to move. All the controls are a lot lighter. Everything feels less hefty. And in that sense, the Innova HyCross is a lot easier to drive. This is something that I said when I drove the HyCross for the first time as well. Compared to the Innova Krista, it's a lot lighter to control, it's a lot easier to maneuver, it's a lot easier to drive. Now let's talk about the important bits. Firstly, that engine. You've got a naturally aspirated 2-liter engine underneath the hood, and it's not as powerful as the Fortuners. It's lower on outputs, and well, it simply does not have that same slug of turbocharged goodness that the Fortuner has, so this is a naturally aspirated engine, and typical NatAsp characteristics, a lot of the power is concentrated in the mid to high range of the engine. Add to that the fact that it is mated to a CVT, and it feels, how do I put this, strained if you're trying to push hard. If you're gliding along in traffic, it's quiet, it's smooth, it's comfortable, you can almost not hear it. It's there somewhere in the background, just a hum. It's not even loud. There's near to no vibrations. When you're gentle with it, it's really easy, refined, calm, and off the line you've got just about enough poke to get moving quickly. It's not a problem at all. This engine, it feels strained when you start pushing it. So you really step on it again, and it becomes loud. You can hear it. It's very audible in the cabin. It's a different sort of loud from the Fortuners. Obviously, that's a turbo diesel. The clatter is a lot more. Here, it's a more refined noise, but it's still loud, and it feels strained because it's making all of that noise, but you're not moving as fast as you would expect to. You've also got that CVT rubber band effect. So all in all, combined, this engine does feel a little strained if you start pushing it really hard. But in day-to-day driving, if you're genuinely just ambling along, it's probably a better motor because it's quiet, it's comfortable, no fuss, no stress, it's just easy going. You've got an eco mode, and that dulls it down even further. Basically, the CVT holds it at less high revs, and it doesn't pick up revs as quickly, so the CVT effect is a little less aggressive. So eco mode, it's okay if you want to save fuel. If you don't, then just keep it off eco mode and drive it sensibly, and you should be good. Mind you, this is the petrol, not the hybrid. You do get a hybrid. The hybrid with its electric torque fill and a little bit of assistance from the electric motor does make it a little better. Initial responses are quicker, in that you can even start off fully in EV mode. So you've got an EV mode button, you can press it and start in EV mode. The hybrid, it's a different ball game altogether. If you want to know more about the hybrid, you can see my first drive review. We'll put the link on the screen right now. Then we come to the chassis. Now, this is where the big changes for the Innova are. You've got a monocoque chassis, very different from the ladder frame that existed before. It's now front wheel drive, not rear wheel drive. And in that sense, the whole driving setup has got a lot more refined. Ride quality is better. It doesn't jiggle around as much as before. Even compared to the Fortuner, I'd say ride quality is better. So over bad patches of road, you can feel a lot less of it in the cabin. It absorbs a lot of it better. Then there's the handling. Inherently, the handling of monocoques are better, and you feel that in the Innova HyCross. What I told you about changing lanes in the Fortuner, you can feel that little bit of unsettledness. That doesn't happen in the Innova HyCross. It feels a lot more planted. It feels a lot more settled. Similarly, when you're going around a bend, you've got a lot more directness to the front end, a lot more connectedness through the steering wheel to the front end. Now, get back on the gas a lot earlier. It just gives you a lot more confidence when you're coming around a corner. Where the Innova lacks compared to the Fortuner is that sense of robustness and that sense of indestructibility. The older Innova Krista had that. It did feel robust. It did feel like it would make it to the ends of the earth. This one doesn't feel that way. It lacks that sheer indestructible feeling. It's a combination of many things. Firstly, the interiors aren't up to scratch with what we've come to expect from Toyota, but also the way it feels when it moves over our roads, the heft with which a ladder frame chassis moves. It does not replicate that in the Innova HyCross. The weight of the controls, the way the suspension behaves when you go through bad patches of roads, this feels a lot more fragile. It's an impression. This is not to say that the Innova HyCross will not last. We don't know because we haven't driven it for as many kilometers as we've driven Fortuners or Innova Cristas. But the impression that you get, the perceived feelings that you get, the perception that the car gives you is that it may not be as indestructible as the Fortuner. Now, whether it will or not, time will tell, and we will report back to you when we know of Innovas that have run 1-2 lakh kilometers. But until then, we just have to go by what we feel. When you're talking about SUVs, you've got to talk about 4x4, and in terms of the drivetrain layout, this is nowhere close to an SUV. It's a front-wheel drive, it's a monocoque. So the Fortuner, it scores well on that part. It's a proper true blue SUV with 4x4 capability. The Innova can't even touch it. We're not even going to bother try taking the Innova off-road because it's not built for that sort of driving. Now let's talk prices. The Toyota Innova HyCross is a lot more affordable than the Fortuner. The range for the Innova HyCross starts at around rupees 18.5 lakhs ex-showroom, and the top-end hybrids, they're a little over 29 lakhs ex-showroom. The Fortuner, on the other hand, it starts at rupees 32 lakhs, and the top-end diesel 4x4s, they're around 42 lakhs ex-showroom. Now, to answer the question, which of these two cars should you get? On every objective measure, the Innova HyCross is better. It's more comfortable, it's quieter, it's more spacious, it's got better features at the top end. So if you're looking for a car that's purely for on-road driving in the city, on the highways, something that you're going to be spending a lot of time in the backseat of, the Innova HyCross is the way to go. But there are two reasons why you should pick the Fortuner over the HyCross. One is if you like that traditional SUV feel. This is a proper ladder frame SUV. It feels like a proper ladder frame SUV when you're behind the wheel. It also looks like a proper imposing SUV. That is not something that the Innova HyCross can replicate. And the second reason is if you need proper 4x4 ability. It has a proper low-range gearbox. It is untouchable off-road. This, it simply cannot compare. And also, the Fortuner has proven itself to be an indestructible machine. Now the question is, what sort of 7-seater do you want in your life? We've compared the Toyota Innova HyCross with the Innova Krista and the Fortuner in the latest issue of Evo India magazine. You can buy a single issue or subscribe from the link in the description below.